Hey there YouTube, and welcome to Willovision. You read the title of this video correctly. The strategy that I've come up with for Warzone isn't boosting. It doesn't involve aimbots or lag switches. I am not a hacker, and I wouldn't show you how to cheat even if I knew how. What if I told you that I've won games of Warzone without firing a single shot? I've amassed almost 50 wins in Warzone while playing around 260 games. In fact, when my squad ran this strategy on a test weekend, we played a total of 9 games, and we won 3 of them. That sort of success rate isn't just good, it rivals some of the best Call of Duty players in the world. Warzone, like all Battle Royale games, is an arena, and this strategy can be used, regardless of your inherent level of skill, to do something that only a select number of players can do, and that is to win games of Warzone and win them consistently. I'm confident that if you're a player of even average skill, you'll be able to use this strategy to achieve a victory or two in Warzone. But before we drop in, I'm going to go ahead and make a very quick and very important disclaimer. If you're the type of Warzone player who likes to run and gun, this strategy is absolutely not for you. I want to state that up front because I make no attempt to hide the fact that this strategy involves very little combat and even actively avoids confrontation for the overwhelming majority of the game. If you're interested in running about Verdansk, killing other players, looting ugly buildings, and completing contracts, you've been warned. At this point in the broadcast, gamer discretion is advised. In the interest of time, I'll be providing timestamps for you to take a look at. I think that'll be helpful since this video might be a bit longer, to split up the video into different sections, which you'll be able to see in the timeline below. So let's start with a basic description of what this strategy actually is. In simple terms, my Warzone strategy is to maximize the mobility and firepower of your squad by ensuring that they're able to make it to the very end of the game with full health and full armor, hopefully with no dead squad members. Your squad will have at its disposal RPGs and a helicopter with and from which you will rain down rockets on the opposing squads and claim victory. Now, if you're planning on stopping the video now because you feel like you know enough about the strategy to make it work, I would strongly recommend that you don't do that. There's obviously a lot that actually goes into putting your squad in the position to win the game. Trust the process. So my plan in this video is to play for you a select game of Warzone that my squad won using this strategy while describing each of the steps we used in detail, so that you'll know exactly how we make use of this strategy to consistently win games. Starting out, there are a few preliminary considerations that you'll need to think about. Firstly, you need to have at least one other person doing this strategy with you, but ideally you're going to want a squad of at least 2 other people to run the strategy with. When it comes to squad mates, it's more the merrier, because this means that you'll have much more firepower at your disposal. Specifically, you're going to need a good pilot and 2 gunners. Next, you need to do a bit of tinkering with your loadouts. It's very important that you make sure to choose weapons that are modified for Warzone, because just like any Warzone strategy, there are a few key things to think about. I've always found the most useful loadouts in Warzone to include an assault rifle, SMG, or an LMG with a large magazine size, because most players you'll run into will have body armor, which means that you need to be able to lay down sustained fire without reloading, especially if you run into multiple enemies at once. Personally, I always use the M13 because it's a weapon that I'm familiar with, and with the attachments I'm using, you can see that it's an extremely controllable weapon, even on fully automatic fire. But your secondary weapon is by far the most important part of your class if you're using this strategy. And there are 2 weapons that your squad should be using, an RPG or a Pilla. You don't want to use the other 2 launchers because the Strela doesn't do much splash damage, and you don't want to use the Joker because its missile's flight path will usually end up killing you when trying to fire it from a moving helicopter. I highly recommend that everyone who is not a pilot use the RPG and that the pilot be the only person using the Pilla. This will come up again later. As for your perks and equipment, there are really only 5 perks that I recommend using for this strategy, and they are EOD, Cold-Blooded, Ghost, Amped, and Point Man. EOD is a useful combat perk which will protect you from explosive devices to a certain extent, so I would make sure to have that perk selected. Cold-Blooded is limited in use to teams with thermal scopes, which are pretty rare at the end of the game, and again, this is where you'll typically want to be engaged in combat. Ghost will keep you off radar in the event that you encounter enemy UAVs and heartbeat sensors. Amped will help you switch weapons faster, which will definitely be important for people using launchers. And finally, I recommend that at least one person in your squad, perhaps your pilot, select Point Man over Ghost, because the helicopter will be visible on enemy radar regardless of whether or not the pilot has Ghost on, and having Point Man selected will give your team a bonus on completed contracts, which will be an important part of the strategy. As for equipment, there really isn't much to discuss here, so feel free to experiment with this as you please. Personally, I always recommend using C4 or proximity mines as they can be dropped from the air and will deal significant damage to anyone on the ground. So once you have your classes set up and your squad assembled, start up a game of Warzone and get yourself a proper warm-up. You'll be deploying soon. So when you enter the lobby for the game, you'll start out in a warm-up mode. If you're extra paranoid, I recommend not getting into the helicopter during this phase of the game, so as not to tip anyone off that you and your squad will use the helicopter during the game itself. When the game starts, you should immediately get your bearings and familiarize yourself with 4 key features on the map. The location of the first circle, the location of helicopters, the location of the plane's flight path, and last, the type of terrain that the final circle will most likely be in. The location of the circle will help indicate how much territory you'll have to maneuver in, and you'll need to know the location of the helicopters to find one unlikely to be approached by other squads. Typically, I like to go for a helicopter that's A, outside of the circle, and B, far away from the plane's flight path, because most squads aren't likely to land in such a location. Also, you'll want to get an idea of the plane's flight path and try to commit it to memory, because doing so will give you a heads up as to where most enemy squads will be dropping. Finally, you'll need to know the type of terrain that you'll be flying over to give you an idea of where the best buy stations will be, and any rendezvous points for your squad if your helicopter should happen to be shot down. So the next step is to find at least 1 helicopter, but maybe 2 helicopters, that will be unlikely to have enemies landing nearby. Generally speaking, 2 helicopters are better than 1 because it allows your squad to spread the risk of enemy ground fire and even use 1 helicopter as a wild weasel. Wild weasel is a term that originated in the Vietnam War for aircraft that were meant to distract and screen an area for enemy anti-air installations. In the case of Warzone, this means flagging areas where enemy forces are massed and letting your squad know that they should stay away from an area where they will likely come into contact with the enemy. When you're first dropping in, you can split up in whatever way your squad feels is the most advantageous. But generally speaking, assuming that you're playing quads, you're going to want to split up into squads of 2 and avoid combat with opposing squads. Your chief priority is to get to the helicopter immediately. But if you happen to be in a safe area and can quickly grab loot, let your gunner go ahead and do so and get whatever weapons he can find. He might need something to defend the helicopter with. Also, there are 3 items that you aren't very likely to find, but they are super helpful and you should hold on to them if you happen to find one. These items are trophy systems, armor plates, and munitions boxes. But if your helicopter pilot says that you have incoming enemies, obviously get out of there. Believe me, opening an extra box or 2 for weapons and other items absolutely is not worth the risk of your helicopter taking severe damage or even being destroyed entirely. If you happen to land and aren't able to secure the helicopter before another squad does, immediately seek a ground vehicle and get to another helicopter. If you have a choice, I usually recommend using the cargo truck because it has heavy armor and offers the driver substantial protection. But if you're truly unable to secure a helicopter at all, then it's pretty much game over, and you're almost certainly going to be running a ground game from that point on. But assuming that you do secure a helicopter, your next step is going to be to find a most wanted contract. If you're a gunner, you should point out multiple most wanted contracts in order to give your pilot an idea of where to go after securing and completing the first most wanted contract. Because you'll be doing more than one over the course of the game, and while your squad has one most wanted contract active, other most wanted contracts will not appear on your world map. Next, you're going to want to start flying around looking for safe zones. Safe zones are just areas on the map where you won't expect many other squads to be. But note that safety is a relative term, especially with an active most wanted contract on, because other squads can still see your squad member's location. These places on the map can depend on where exactly the plane's flight plan is, because most players will tend to stay in a certain area and then move towards the circle after landing, which would mean that on the map that I'm pointing to now, the logical areas to avoid will be these positions here, and the safety positions would be these places here. A good rule of thumb for your safety zones is to approach an area that no squad would have a logical reason for approaching. For example, I always like to pilot the helicopter into areas of the map that I know most people don't go to, such as to the east of Prison or to the northeast of Quarry. For a visual demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and list the safety zones that I tend to use on the map now. As you can see, you don't want to go to places that have a lot of buildings or other areas that enemy squads are likely to be exploring, looking for loot and completing contracts. Do keep in mind that you're going to have a most wanted contract on, which will identify you on the map for enemy squads. So even if you do fly your helicopter to one of the safety zones, you should still make an effort to move around so that you don't fall prey to an opposing squad, who might see a static helicopter as an easy target. By this time, you should be coming to the end of your first most wanted contract, so you're going to want to go ahead and get your next contract, which again should be marked for your convenience. If one or all of your previously marked most wanted contracts have been taken, then this will be an indication that there are enemy squads in the area. Proceed with caution. Once your squad has begun its second most wanted contract, get in position for your loadout to drop. Your loadout will always drop within about 200 meters of your squad leader, so make sure that he or she is in a position that will make the loadout drop occur in an area of the map that's relatively safe. Generally, this will follow the pattern of the safety zones I pointed out earlier, so here they are again for your convenience. Make sure to keep track of time here, because the loadout will always drop at exactly 14 seconds to go on the closing of the first circle. When the loadout drops, be ready to swoop in and rapidly collect your weapons. Be on extremely high alert if more than one loadout drops with your own loadout, as this means that there is an enemy squad close by, and they will most likely quickly move to the loadout's location. To reduce time spent on the ground, which is where you'll be most vulnerable with this strategy, you need to make sure that your Warzone class is in a convenient place in your class menu. I generally have my Warzone classes listed at the end of my loadout list, so that I can flick one or two buttons and have my weapons assembled. So remember when I said that your squad's pilot should have a pillar? One of the best ways I've seen to attack my squad when we're using this strategy is by attacking us head-on with an opposing helicopter. Enemy helicopters have given us problems in the past, but there is a simple and easy way around the problem. From my own experience playing Warzone, the vast majority of Call of Duty players have absolutely no clue about how to dodge missiles. So when you fire at them, or in some cases even just start locking onto them, they'll abandon their helicopter immediately. Looking at this diagram, I'm pretty sure you can see that there is someone in this picture that doesn't typically need to have an RPG handy for the end of the game, but could still be the perfect guy to have a pillar handy to attack enemy helicopters. It's the pilot. You can counter an enemy helicopter by having the pilot switch seats with another person in the chopper. This can even be done mid-air, without landing, and then firing on that other squad so that they get out of the sky. But will a vision, you ask? Why don't the gunners use pillars? So honestly, the other players can use a pillar, but I strongly recommend that they don't, because the pillar's biggest strength is its ability to lock onto a target, which you can't do against individual players on the ground, and the pillar's splash damage radius isn't as large as the RPG's, meaning that the RPG, by far, is going to be the most effective weapon your squad will have against squads on the ground. And the pilot isn't usually going to be called on to use his or her rockets against the final squads anyway. But again, having a pillar can be a good insurance policy against rival squads using helicopters. So after securing your loadout, you can think about doing one more Most Wanted or another contract, because you do need to have a bit of cash on hand, as your squad will next need to think about going to a buy station. It's important to note here that while your gunners do need to be very reserved about using their rockets, they don't need to be shy with their other weapons, because they likely won't need them, and this piece of advice is really going to be something that stretches throughout the course of the game. If you start taking fire, have your gunners return fire even if they're only shooting in the general vicinity of the enemy. Having an enemy squad pinned down can help you make a quick escape and discourage them from chewing through the helicopter's very limited armor. Ideally, you want each of your squad members to have at least $10,000 in cash on hand before hitting up the buy station. You don't necessarily need this amount of money, but the more money you have, the better position you'll be in at the end of the game. Your squad will need to approach a buy station and purchase the following items, listed by order of priority, with the first item being absolutely critical and the last item being more of an insurance policy. The first item you'll need is one munitions box, and your squad will absolutely need this. Remember that your RPGs will need ammo, and this strategy doesn't involve much looting. This will probably be your only real chance to stock up on ammunition. Next, you're going to need 1 or 2 armor plate bundles. These will be needed for your gunners especially. Gunners should have at least 4 armor plates on backup, because they'll be the most likely to take enemy ground fire. Up next are gas masks. I recommend that at least one person in your squad have one. More on this later. You'll also need some precision airstrikes. Precision airstrikes are a great way to make squads on the ground stop firing at you if you're taking heavy fire from a squad in cover, and it can also be very useful for destroying opposing squads in the endgame. Precision airstrikes are generally far superior to cluster strikes because they occur much more quickly, which gives enemy squads much less time to react and move out of the affected area. Like the RPGs, airstrikes are a tool that you'll want to try to reserve for the very end of the game. When using an airstrike, I strongly encourage the squad member using the airstrike to ping the location of the airstrike for the pilot so that he or she can avoid the flight path of the incoming attack aircraft. Please note that like any kill streak, a precision airstrike will be deadly to the one using it. If it hits your helicopter, your squad member will almost certainly die. Next, I would recommend that the pilot consider getting a UAV if he or she doesn't get a precision airstrike, for helping the gunners find targets on the ground. And finally, if you have any money left over, I would consider getting a self-revive. Self-revives are an insurance policy in the truest sense of the word, and typically they're the least critical thing to buy. Because if your squad is using a helicopter, it's really unlikely that anyone in your squad will use a self-revive. But if your squad is shot down or has to abandon the helicopter, at least you'll have them for the ground game. But do note that if a squad mate is shot out of the helicopter, that the squad mate won't be able to use it when he or she hits the ground. The fall damage will be fatal. After making your purchases, you can either go ahead and distribute your resources such as the munitions box at the buy station. though I don't usually advise this, because please note that landing at a buy station at this point in the game is usually one of the most risky parts of the entire strategy. So you'll want to do this very quickly, and preferably at a buy station that's unlikely to be occupied by another squad. I always recommend trying to use a buy station that's on the verge of being overtaken by the gas, and in an area of the map that doesn't offer opposing squads much cover or concealment from which to ambush you. Something you should keep in mind here is that when your squad isn't using the helicopter will be visible on the world map to other squads. A good rule of thumb is to limit your time at the buy station to no more than 30 to 45 seconds. This will become easier for your squad to accomplish with practice. Usually at this point you'll be approaching the end game and your focus should be on continuing to stay mobile in the helicopter or helicopters your squad is using. There are two flight plans that I like to use, either trying to find an area devoid of enemies and simply remaining hidden while moving towards the circle with the gas behind you, or you can do what I call the perimeter strategy and closely trail the outer edges of the gas while staying at a high altitude. The principle underlying the perimeter flight plan is pretty simple. As time goes on, the circle gets smaller and smaller, and more squads will be chased into the zone by the incoming gas. The underlying assumption here is that squads being chased by the gas are far less likely to be focused on shooting a fast-moving target high above them. Compare this with squads that are farther into the circle and will almost certainly be in a better position to fight you from a secured location. If you're using the perimeter flight plan, try to avoid areas that are on the edge of the map, as other squads are likely to congregate there and will be in a better position to attack you from the ground. So at this point, I really need to bring up guided missile launchers and what you should do about them. In most Warzone games I've played, there have been a copious number of shoulder-fired guided missile systems, which are highly effective in destroying helicopters. I won't go into detail on how you can counter these weapons here, other than my brief description of using a distraction helicopter, but if you haven't already watched my tutorial on how to dodge missiles in Warzone, I strongly advise that you do so. Please keep in mind that you can use a trophy system in your helicopter to destroy incoming missiles before they strike you, so if you have one handy, make sure to use it, but keep in mind that the trophy system doesn't last indefinitely. I would recommend that if you have a Wild Weasel helicopter, that your Wild Weasel pilot make use of a more aggressive flight plan through the center of the circle, or even in areas where you suspect enemy squads will be. If either aircraft receives a missile lock or takes heavy ground fire from an area, immediately leave that location and avoid it as the game progresses. It's likely that the enemy squad firing at you won't be tracking you from too far away, so as long as you can stay out of that squad's reach, you'll be alright. But say that you're using two different helicopters in a game and one of your helicopters gets shot down. What do? The most important things here are going to be speed and communication. The squad members of the aircraft that is shot down should try, if at all possible, to give the other pilot an idea of where the missile lock occurred and where the attacking enemy squad is located. Your squad members on the ground should then try to stealthily move, on foot or in a vehicle, to a safe spot for pickup. I usually recommend staying away from downtown and the stadium, and instead opting for a more open area where the helicopter pilot can easily spot threats from the air and wave off if the landing would be too hazardous. When you've made it to around the 4th or 5th circle, you'll really be getting close to the end game. Regardless of the flight plan you've been following up to this point, you should start, or continue, to use the perimeter flight plan. At some point near the end of the game, your squad will need to regroup into one helicopter. There really isn't much of a formula for doing so, but ideally, you'll want to get into one helicopter when the number of squads left in the game is somewhere between 10 and 20. At around the 6th circle, the number of opposing squads will almost certainly be getting very low, but your gunners should still try to hold on to their rockets. Remember that you'll want to maximize the number of rockets that your squad will have available at the end of the game, as well as preserving them for squads that might want to shoot you from the ground. So you're going to want to walk a fine line between using rockets as covering fire so that the squads that really want to hurt you can't do so with impunity, and of course saving your rockets for when they'll really be most effective against the final squad on the ground. Again, use those primary weapons, but I wouldn't recommend trying to get into a shooting match with squads on the ground unless they attack you first and become a real threat. Otherwise, this could encourage other squads to shoot at you and negatively impact the health of your helicopter. During these final few circles, your gunners will need to have eagle's eyes, because if your chopper takes too much fire, you'll be running a ground game. So let's say that a squad on the ground is really giving you grief. They're rapidly hitting your helicopter with gunfire, or maybe they've even saved a pillow for the endgame. At this point, you might have to get a bit aggressive. I recommend burning a precision airstrike or two to force them into cover. If they're really becoming a problem, fire on them as much as possible. There's always the possibility that they'll get third-partied by another ground-based squad, or simply back off of shooting you to focus on more immediate threats. Another way to avoid ground fire while flying around the perimeter of the circle is to take note of an area that you're taking a large amount of fire from. Try to avoid that area by flying in a crescent pattern around the perimeter, but not flying directly overhead of the squad shooting you. When you're really getting close to the end of the game, you should be in great shape. Your pilot should try to keep track of the number of squads left on the ground, and when you're facing around 10 remaining squads, you'll be in a great position to pull in the win. Keep flying around and avoiding combat at this point, because the remaining squads will likely be more focused on each other rather than a passive helicopter flying around above them. Continue flying around the perimeter of the circle and be patient as the number of opposing squads continues to decrease. If you're still fully loaded by the time that only 3 squads remain, this will be a really good sign. Continue avoiding fire if possible, but have your gunners track the enemy squads on the ground. If you can avoid firing your weapons until only your squad and another squad on the ground remain, then you're good to go. Fire at will. Warzone is a squad effort, but constant combat will inevitably take a toll on most squads. When facing the final squad, this is where I think you'll really understand why preserving your squad's ammunition, armor, and health is so critical. At the end game, a fully loaded squad with armor, a helicopter, and up to 24 rockets is going to be very hard to beat. In an ideal world, your squad will be ganging up on a squad that'll be playing down a man. In such a case, it's highly likely that your squad's use of rockets will absolutely annihilate anyone opposing you on the ground. But even if something goes wrong for your squad towards the end of the game, you'll still most likely be fully loaded and everyone in your chopper will have a parachute, so you can position yourself very well for the end game even if your helicopter is shot down. In an instance where you are shot down, what you'll want to do is spread out and make sure that the enemy can't simply attack all of you collectively as you parachute in. Find cover, gradually move in with the circle behind you, and destroy your remaining opposition. Remember when I said that your squad should try to make sure that at least one person has a gas mask? This will be that squad member's time to shine. If you have a gas mask, land outside of the circle and in the gas. That's right, land inside the gas, but still within reach of the final circle. This will confuse squads on the ground, whose natural tendency will be to move away from the gas and towards the circle. Doing so will allow you to stealthily flank them from behind. I have literally won games this way. If you've followed the strategy up to this point, then open fire and destroy the last squad on the ground ASAP. And there you have it, a Warzone victory. No, you didn't get to kill 40 people in a game, but your squad has nonetheless outwitted your opponents, and whether you feel like it or not, you've earned yourself a victory in one of the most competitive battle royale modes out there. Congratulations. One of the things that I like about Warzone is that there really is so much depth to the choices that you and your squad can make, and there really aren't any players that haven't lost a game of Warzone because of the elements of chance and the unpredictability of enemy squads. The success rate of this strategy is a testament to that randomness. You will not win 100% of your games using this strategy. No strategy can guarantee that you win any given game of Warzone, but this strategy can still put you and your squad members in the best possible position to win the game. And beyond just showing you my stats, I wanted you all to see the success rate of this strategy truly put to the test in order to really bolster my point about its success rate. As I said towards the beginning of this video, a group of friends and I put this strategy to the test one weekend where we played 9 games of Warzone and we won 3 of the 9 games. This is ultimately why I feel like this strategy is arguably the best Warzone strategy out there. It really and truly does allow normal gamers to do something that they shouldn't otherwise be able to do, and that is to win at a game that is inherently very difficult, and to do so with a rate of success that rivals the best COD players in the world. In concluding this video, I want to give a shout out to the squad members that made this video possible. So special thanks go out to The View from Kyle, NotterB94, Hendo, aka Jeff Epstein 666, and finally Mr. Manicotti. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you gained some insight from this video and from this strategy. Please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for tuning in. Alrighty, so you've made it to the end of the video. I'm always working on new content, so please feel free to like and subscribe because it's a really big help. As always, thanks for tuning in.